Hello guys, welcome to the new session. And in the previous session, I taught us how to actually get a list of users' wallets based on the currently authenticated user. And in this session, we will be moving toward the process of being able to record an expense or income as a transaction. We've already taken care of the process of creating a budget and associating category to a budget. Now, this is what we are going to take care of now: recording expenses and income, right? So the recording of an expense is basically like you withdrawing from your created wallet, while recording of an income is basically the process of you adding money to your wallet. That is the money that you've actually assigned or you've actually put into that your wallet within the budgeting application API. So now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new service. So now that we've actually so the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually move to the process of actually creating a model. And in order to not waste time, I have already created a model for us that we can actually use for recording of our transaction. So I'm going to start from the title. So basically the title of the transaction, maybe, okay, I bought rice, I bought chocolate, and so on. Then description, maybe there is some extra description you want to add to that particular transaction. The user ID basically means the user that actually owns the transaction. The category ID simply implies the category the transaction actually falls under. Is it for feeding? Is it for communication? Is it for internet? The next thing is the wallet ID. So the wallet ID basically means which of your wallet are you that performing that transaction against? Is it based on your remember that currently in the system we have the bank wallet and the cash wallet, and this user also has the test wallet. So as you can see, our balance for this wallet and this right now are zero, but this particular wallet actually has a very nice amount saved in it. The next thing is the amount that you have actually spent or you've recorded for that particular transaction. The next thing is the date that transaction actually occurred. The next thing is the month and the year. And you will notice that I have actually created an index for month and year so that we will be able to query our transactions by month and year easily. So that way, and so our query will be much faster. That was why I don't want to be doing extra functions when we actually perform those query. That is why I have actually retrieved the months and year into a different column. Then the next thing is the type. And for the type, is basically the type of transaction that you are performing. It is either type of income or it is type of expense. As you can see, it is not null and the type of character is just 100 and it is properly indexed as well. Then the next thing is the and the serialization we set is the type. Then the next thing is reversal. So reversal is basically a situation whereby maybe you've recorded a transaction as income and you realize that, oh no, this was actually a mistake. Then you can reverse it. So whatever amount you've added as income will be removed from your entire or from the wallet that is actually associated to that transaction. And if it is expense and you want to reverse it, that, oh no, this is not a this is not an expense, or maybe you don't want that transaction committed anymore, then you can reverse it. So your wallet balance and all will be restated. So the next thing is category, right? So categories, as I explained earlier, is basically the category that is associated to the particular transaction and the wallet model and the user model. So for this transaction, I will not be loading the user and I will not be loading the wallet model as well, but I will be loading the category. And the reason why I don't want to do that is let's load the wallet. Let's load the wallet, but we don't need the user since we know that we are basically um picking up data that is related to a particular, we are loading transactions that are related to a particular user. And as you can see, I have defined a foreign key on each of these for the transaction. Now you will notice a parent ID. So in situations whereby we actually performed a reversal, I want us to be able to know the particular transaction we've performed a reversal against. So this will actually be nice for a situation whereby you want to know what you recorded and what you've actually reversed. So this is basically for record keeping sake, right? So that we can know which particular transaction we actually reversed. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to our base model and I'm going to go to our database and add the transaction model to the list of transaction we want to actually migrate. And I'm going to go to our terminal and perform the migration. So as we've been doing, make migrate. So as you can see, the transaction table has been created, date, time, everything has all been created. So you can see we also added a constraint in situation whereby a particular wallet is deleted. We want all the transactions that are related to that wallet to also be deleted. The same thing for a user. So now that we've actually done our migration, the next thing for us now is to actually create a transaction service and a transaction handler. So for that, I'll do transaction. I'll create transaction underscore service. And I will also create a transaction handler. Transaction handler. All right, good. So the first API that we'll be writing will be the API for adding a transaction or for storing a transaction in the system. And I'm going to start from our handler end. So I'm going to call function. As usual, this will be the H to the handler as we've been doing. Then the name of our function, which is store transaction, and the store transaction will accept C of the echo context. So as we have been doing like forever, the first thing we need to do is to actually create a request store transaction request. So our store transaction request will basically contain all the variables that we are expecting from a user when they actually want to create a transaction. So the first thing we are expecting is the category ID, which will be an unsigned int, and it can be null based on how we have actually defined our wallet model. So let's just quickly visit our model again and see the variables. So you can see the parent ID can be null, title can be null, description can be null, category can be null. So only the amount, the dates, and some other field that cannot be null. So this will be a JSON. We are expecting a JSON, not a form data, and we know that it is required. Validates it is required, and if it is null, we want to omit it. For that, we just need to state that omit null if a null parameter is passed. Otherwise, we want to set it as a number. So it's not required. Sorry, it should not be required. Omit null and it's not required. The next thing we need to accept is the wallet ID. And the wallet ID is actually compulsory, so that cannot be null. So let me also state that omit. Let me just omit. So our wallet ID is required and it must be of type number since we are using integers for our database IDs. The next thing is the amount. Our amount will be of type float64 and it cannot be null. JSON validates required number. So, but our amounts will be of type numeric with a minimum value of 1. The next thing is the dates of the transaction. And the reason why I am accepting the date of the transaction from the user is I'm assuming that the user may want to actually record a transaction. Maybe the user actually performed the particular transaction yesterday and they just had access to maybe their mobile device or wherever they are recording their budget. So that's why we are providing the option of actually supplying a database for us for the API. But what we are going to do is it will not be required. So this will be omit empty, omit empty. That is, if that string is empty, omit empty, omit empty. So if the string is empty, we will not be accepting it. And the required format is of date time. And we are expecting this particular format, that is the year, the day, and month. We don't need the time. Maybe I think we don't need the time. We basically want to know the day that it was actually the transaction was actually performed. The next thing we want to do is accept description. And as we know, our description can be null. So that's why I'm attaching a asterisk. I'm setting it as a pointer so that it can accept null. And as we did here, this can also will be omit null, and it must be of type string. If it is supplied, the maximum number of characters should not be more than, let's say, 500. Or what was the character that we set on the model end? So description, so 500. So I'm just going to set it as, let's say, 499. 490, or let's just use 490. So now setting this as 490 simply means the maximum number of characters that description field is going to accept is going to be 490. And we want to set the minimum as maybe, let's say, like 2 characters. So the next thing we want to do is we want to accept the title, and the title can also be null. And maximum of, if we check our transaction model, so the maximum is 200. So that means the number of characters that we can also accept cannot be more than 200. But for this, I will just set it as let's say maximum of 20, or let's say maybe maximum of 100, and minimum of 2 as well, 2 characters. So this will be omit null. So what this is going to do is, if the field is not null, then this will actually kick in, basically. So that's what will actually happen. So the next thing I want to do is type. We want to accept the type of transaction. So for the type of transaction, it's either it is of type income or it is of type um, expense. So for this is compulsory, and I will set this as required, and it will be one of income or expense, right? One of income or expense. So that's how you actually perform validation using this gorm package if you want to check if the field that was supplied is in a list of preferred enums. So the last thing we need is a parent's ID, which will be uint. But for this, I will not be accepting it. I will not be accepting it since it is not something that we are expecting from the user. So that is what we need to actually record a transaction. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to continue our transaction handler. So I'll create a request. I'll call this store transaction request, and this will be request dot start transaction request. So as we've been doing across the application since, I'm just going to come to the budget and I'm going to copy all of this. Oh, this is all we need actually. This section right here. And I'm going to paste. So as we've done, we've collected the currently authenticated user. Then we need to pass in the payload, right? So which is this payload? Let me just do that. Let's do this. Yeah. Then we've binded the request body. So if there's any error, it is going to be returned. Then we are performing the validation, right? Let me return nil to even test this particular endpoint. We are seeing some red error. Okay. Let me just say fmt.print line user physically. So I'm going to register this particular route now. I'll just copy this and paste. So this, I'll call this should be wallet. I'll call this transaction routes. And this will be transactions. Transaction route. So this will be store transaction, and I'll comment this out, right? Now that we've restarted our application, so let's go to our Postman and go to the transaction end. So I've created a sample of what our transaction our transaction params will look like. So I'm going to hit this endpoint. So as you can see, we are getting a comma, okay. And let's see. Yeah. So I think we are trying to print something, right? Okay, so you can see that our validation is actually being passed. So if we remove amount, hit the endpoint, so you can see amount is required, which is good. So we can continue then. Okay, now that we know that our application is passing validation, and if the validation is wrong, we are actually returning an error. So the next thing we need to do is, number one, we need to retrieve the category. we need to also retrieve the wallet if provided. So in order to do that, we need both the category service and the wallet service, right? So let's create the category service equals to new category service, and this will be our h.db, right? The next thing we need is the wallet service, and that will be new wallet service, like so. Now that we have that, the next thing we need to check is, the first thing I would like to check is if the wallet that was supplied is valid, right? So in order to do that, I'll just say wallet, an error, wallet service dot find. Let's see what kind of method do we have in our wallet service for user ID. Okay, so we are going to use this method. Okay, this one is for name and user ID. What I need is an API to get a wallet by the ID. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to I'm going to create a method to actually read a wallet. So function, let me just copy all of this guy right here and paste. This will be a model, and this will be find by ID. Yes. So we need to create a variable. Let's call it wallet. And we need to actually query the wallet. So the first thing is result. So what I'm going to use here is I'm going to use the user ID scope that we've actually created. Scopes. And it will be, let's see how we actually used it. I think it is in the budget handler that we used the scope. Well, let's just look for the scope itself and see where it has been used. So common scopes, good. So let's see here, usages. Yes, this is what I need. Scopes. I want to see how it has been used. So let's go back to our wallet service, then apply the scopes. Yeah. So this will help us make sure that, so this will be user ID. So for this, we'll be accepting the user ID and the wallet ID. The wallet ID, which will also be unsigned integer. Then we'll say where. So for this, we'll do first supply the wallet model and supply the wallet ID we are filtering by. So this will do select star from wallet, where user ID and wallet ID is equals to the IDs that we've actually supplied. For this, I will just be ignoring the error. No problem. Let's return the error. Then I'm going to return the wallet or nil. So I'm going to go back to the transaction handler, and I'm going to call the read by ID wallet service dot. Why is that not working? Oh, find by ID should be in capital letter. So that will be find by ID. And I'm going to pass the currently authenticated, no, the wallet ID. That will be data or payload dot wallet ID and user dot ID. So for it, right here, I'm going to ignore the error. So now we want to check if the wallet is nil. If the wallet is nil, we want to wallet not found, right? Or what's the preferred error message? What error message is best suitable? I think the wallet not found error is just fine. So now that we've actually done that, let me just return a not found, send not found response, right? Yeah, because the wallet was not found. Or let me say invalid. Let me just say invalid wallets. So the next thing we want to do is we want to retrieve the category that is actually related to the transaction that has been supplied. So for that, we need to be certain that the category also exists. So what we are going to do is if the transaction, if the data or payload dot category ID is not nil. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a wallet var, or I'm going to create a category of models dot category model, and also be a pointer. So so if the category ID that was retrieved is non-nil, we want to say results. We want to say category service dot get by ID the category dot no sorry payload dot category ID, and the payload or category ID, let's undo the error. So this would be the category, right? Okay, this will be the category that we just retrieved, or let me say retrieved category. So if there is no error, I want to set the retrieved category to the category that was actually retrieved. So this is okay. The category ID is of type unsigned int. So what we can do for this is we can just dereference it. So now that we've actually retrieved our category, so if the category is actually filled, then we are assigning the category that was retrieved to our category variable. So otherwise, okay, we've retrieved category, we have retrieved the wallet. So the next thing we need to do once we've done that is to actually go ahead to try and create the transaction. So for the transaction, I'm also going to, let me just move this right at the top. So I'm going to create a transaction model. And for this transaction, what I'll be doing is I'll be wrapping the process of the creation of the transaction into a model, into a transaction, I mean. So, and I've taught us how to actually make use of transaction using gorm in one of our previous chapters. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to accept an error. and I'm going to initialize a transaction. And this transaction is basically expecting a, or is a function as well, expecting the gorm instance like this. So I'm suspecting that this will be passed into this function. So now that we've actually done that, the next thing is, the first thing we need to return is nil. So if there is no error, and we return nil, the transaction will be committed into the database. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to check that if the payload.transaction.type, if the transaction.type is type of income. So I'm going to create two enums. I'm going to create two constants in our transaction service. So I'm going to say const income equals to income, and const let me say const expense equals to expense. It should be double quotes income, right? So in our handler now, I'm going to say if the payload type is income, that is, if is of type transaction income, we want to undo it differently, right? This will be double equals to register income. So else if, or we don't need an else if the payload is of type expense services dot expense, right? We also want to register an expense, right? Now there are some couple of things we need to take care of. So if it is an income, we want to increment the wallet. And let me just move this outside here. We want to increment the wallet. Then after incrementing the wallet, then we can go ahead to, so for if it is type of expense, we want to increment the wallet. If it is type of, oh sorry sorry so if it is type of expense, we want to decrement the wallet balance. We want to increment the wallet balance. So now that we've actually done that, if all of this is good, we want to create a transaction of type income or wallet. Oh, sorry, income or expense. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to expecting an error, and we are going to need the wallet service, and the wallet service will be incrementing. I'll call it increment wallet balance. This will be a method, and I'm going to pass the current transaction that we are performing into the wallet service. The transaction, I'm going to pass the wallet model that we actually retrieved, and I'm going to pass the amount that was sent. So that will be payload dot amount, and we are going to create a method for this. So I'm going to go back to the transaction model. I'm going to also create one for expense, and I'm going to call this decrement wallet balance. And the decrement wallet balance is also expecting the same thing. So let's tackle the increment wallet part. So increment wallet balance. Let's go to the method. So the first thing we need to do is to actually retrieve the current balance on the wallet. So the wallet dot balance. So sorry, the first thing we need to is we need to calculate the new wallet balance plus the amount that was actually supplied, right? And the next thing we need to do is basically to now set the wallet that we passed balance to the new balance. Then we need to save the wallet like so. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to save everything like that. I'm just going to perform an update. So I'm going to use the tx dot model. Let me say models dot wallet dot update. So this will be the wallet that was passed. Sorry, the wallet. Then update the balance with this new balance. Then once we do that, we want to actually return if everything goes well, that is everything goes well with the oh there should be an error. I'm not sure, does this return any results? Okay, yeah, it has a result. So we can say results if result.nil return error, otherwise return nil, right? So we want to then implement for decrement. So in order to decrement a wallet, so it's basically almost the same thing. The only difference is this time around it will be minus amount. So so one thing we want to allow the users to have is a negative account. They should know when they have actually outspent more than what they have in their wallet. Then we set the new wallet balance. So allow negative balance, right? We are intentionally allowing negative balance. Now, once we do that, we want to update the wallet balance, and if there is any error, we want to return the error. So now that we've actually implemented both, the first thing we need to do is if there is any error, we want to return an errors dot new errors dot new let me say this, yeah. So we just say transaction failed, try again later. So if an error occurs during this process, nothing will actually be committed into the database. The same thing for here if an error actually occurred. Now that we've actually registered that it is either an increment or um, it is a decrement if it is an expense. The next thing we need to do is in the process of we need to actually implement the creation of a wallet. Oh, sorry, the creation of a transaction that is going to associate the type of action that was performed here. So to do that, the first thing is, let's say, transaction or an error, and this will be, where is this? Okay, so a transaction or an error, we need the transaction service. So we need to go to our transaction service now and generate a transaction service. So let's say transaction service right here, right here. So let me call this transaction service, right? Okay. So then the transaction, they need to initialize the transaction service. There should be service. So we need new transaction service, transaction service. Or let's initiate the transaction service inside uh, the let's initiate it inside the transaction itself so that we can pass the current transaction as the DB instance. Transaction service. Now that that is done, then we need to say transaction service dot create. So our transaction service needs to accept some params. The first parameter we'll be sending is the payload. The second parameter we'll be sending is the user that actually performed the transaction. And the third one will be if the transaction is false or it is true. So that is if it is of type of reversal or not. So false, let me just say false will be the default. And we are going to create a method for this. Yeah. So this, I'll be calling it is reversal. And this will be a models.transaction, and this will be of type error. Okay. Now that we've actually done that, let's move to the process of creating the transaction. So we need to create a new transaction model. Transaction model. And the transaction model, we need to accept some parameter. The first thing is the category ID, which will be payload.category ID amount. Then let me just description, payload.description. The next thing is the amount, payload.amount. The next thing is the user ID. So this will be user ID. Then that will be user ID. We want to set if it is reversal, right? Then we need to set the type, which will be payload dot type. It can either be an income or an expense. Then we need to set the wallet ID, payload.wallet ID. Then we need to set the date of the transaction, right? And for that, we also need to set the month and year of the transaction. So for that, I'm going to say, so for this, what I'm going to do is I won't set this yet, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to check if the date was actually supplied. If the date was not actually supplied, what we are going to do is we want to make sure that we actually assign a new date to the date field, that is the current date and time, to the date field. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a small method right here, and I'm going to call it date to, or let me say, format date. And the format date will be expecting a date of type string, and it will be returning time dot time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it t of type time. So if the date supplied is an empty string, I'm going to return the time, right? Otherwise, I'm going to like format the supply date. So what I'm going to do is supplied date. So as you know, if you recall, during the process of creating our validation, if I can easily locate it, you can see this is the what we are expecting, 2006 01 02, like so. So basically that's what we are trying to do here. So 2006 01 02, this is a format that is acceptable by the pass parameter, right? So if there is an error, we want to return, if error is not nil, sorry, if error is not nil, we want to return errors dot nil, invalidate format, right? Otherwise, we want to return the supplied date. Or okay, time or error. So this will be nil. Okay, so let's do this. Let's pass it as a pointer. Then we'll dereference it. So time, then nil. So this will be time, then nil. So in order to actually respect this, we must pass this as a pointer and this also as a pointer. Okay, now that we are actually done with the function for formatting our dates, the next thing is we need to come back to where we are creating, and we need to check, we need to retrieve the formatted dates, and we need to set this as let's say S, let me call this T, actually T, and I'm using a pointer, okay, TS, let me call this TS, TS, it should be a pointer, and it also be a pointer. So I'm going to call this ts.formatDate, transaction.date, right? So if an error, so this could also return in an error. So if error is not nil, we want to return the error. Otherwise, so what I want to do now is I want to create an error type of invalid dates. Or there is something we need to do. Let's make this a capital letter. Let's format the date before getting into this method so that we can quickly return an error to the user. Just right here. So let me call the formatted. Let me see my transaction service. So let me copy this guy right here. Come to the handler. and paste. So this will be transaction transaction service. Okay, let me just do this. Let's say transaction service h dot db, right? Format date, and we are passing the payload. We are passing the payload dot date. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to return an error early if the formatted date is not actually correct. So format dates like this. So if there is an error, we can quickly say return common dot send bad requests. I'll say invalid date format, right? So that way we are certain that our date format is actually okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass that formatted date into our create method. And this will be a time. And I'm going to call it formatted date. Yeah, so we can say date is formatted date now. So that is, I feel like that is cleaner. Performing that verification right before we go into the service itself, it is cleaner that way, and we are able to actually return the appropriate error to the user. So now that we've done that, the next thing I want to do is I want to actually retrieve the month and the year from those dates that were actually supplied. So for the months, that will be unsigned. So what is our type of months on the category model, on the transaction model? So month, unsigned int and unsigned 16, right? So that unsigned int and unsigned 16. So for month is unsigned uint. So this will be formatted date dot month. And the year will be uint 16 formatted date dot year. So now that we've actually assigned the date, the month, and the year, the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead to actually create the transaction. So result dot the cs dot our db dot create the transaction. If any error occurs, we want to actually return the error. If there is no error, the next thing we need to actually do is we need to check if the transaction dot type is of type of income. If it is type of income, and also if it is type of expense. Because if it is type of income, we want to if it is type of expense, we want to actually increment the wallet. We want to decrement the budget, right? We want to decrement the budget. So I'll say budget service. Let me just create a budget service right at the top here. Oh, no, not necessarily. Let me say budget service equals to budget service. Budget service. Let me just say new budget service. So we want to say budget service dot decrement budget balance. So our decrement budget balance will be expecting the transaction DB and the transaction category ID, and it will also be expecting the transaction dot amount. So the next thing is for us to actually generate this method to decrement a budget balance. Create method. Yes. So 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 what I've done is I have actually created a method for us to get a list of budget by a provided category, right? So that is what I have actually done for this instance. So I think one adjustment that I need to do is if let's say if DB is nil, that is this past DB is nil, I want to set the DB as the service DB. So that way, so that if we are not using this in a transaction, we can easily use the service DB. So okay. So now that we've done that, the next thing is for us to actually retrieve the list of budgets. And I'm going to get the list of budgets like C or B dot get budgets. So this is a category. This is category ID, and it is also expecting the DB instance, right? So this should be a reference, dereferenced. So the next thing now is we need to go through the list of budgets in the system and perform that decrement on them. So we are going to say db dot scopes. Let me even say scopes. The scopes common dot where user ID scope, because we actually need to make sure that the budget that we are decrementing belongs to the particular user. So let me go back to our transaction service and pass the user ID scope. Let me say transaction dot user ID. We are going to add that to our decrement. So this will be after amount. We need uint. User ID. Right. User ID. So update models dot budget model. All we want to update is the amount. That will be the item, that is the budget dot amount minus the amount that was actually passed. So remember, I said for these budgets, we are allowing our users to actually have negative value. They will be able to know that, oh, I've spent beyond my budget, or I've spent more than what I have actually earned, right? So that's the purpose of a budgeting this thing. So another one that we are going to create is that of increment budget balance. So for this, I'm going to be doing a plus rather than a minus. A plus, right? So we are now going to go back to our transaction service. So if it is of type of expense, we want to decrement. If it is of type of income, right? So let me just bring this out here and remove this. So if it is type of income, we want to increment the budget balance. So this is useful in situations whereby we actually performed a reversal, for example, right? So I guess maybe when we do reversal, we will actually revisit this income part, because I'm not sure we really want to be increasing a budget simply because we added more money to our this thing. So I'll say, let me say, and is reversal. That is, let's say we've decremented it initially. Now we have changed our mind that, oh, this thing is a reversal. Then that means we need to increment the budget that we actually spent the money on. So in another session, I'm going to teach us how to actually implement the reversal in full. So now that we've done that, the next thing we need to actually do now is we need to go back to our handler, or we need to actually return the transaction that was actually created, because we are expecting that, right? So we've created the transaction. So what we just need to do now is return the transaction, right? So the next thing now is to go to our handler. Now that we are returning our transaction, right? So if an error occurs, we want to return an error, just like we did here. An error actually occurred. Yeah. So if that is not the case, um, so if everything goes well, so what I want to do is I'll call this created transaction so that we will not override the one at the top. So I'm going to set this, and I'm going to say created transaction. So I'm going to say, so if there is no error, then that means everything is fine, right? So the transaction that we've declared above here, I'm going to transaction equals to created transaction, and I'm going to set the transaction dot category equals to the category that was actually retrieved right here. Then I'm also going to set the transaction wallet to the wallet that was retrieved, right? And probably the transaction dot user, which is not really needed. We don't need the transaction user. Now that we've done that, we can then come here to see that if there is any error, we want to actually send an error. Let me say send internal response. So if any error occurs in here, we want to check that if the error is not nil, we want to send the error. Okay, this should be just equals to. So if error is not nil, we want to return the error to the user and state that is actually an internal server error. Otherwise, we are going to state that h dot send, oh sorry, or common dot send success. We are sending our context, and we are saying transaction stored or created successfully, and we are sending our transaction like so. So that's the process of transaction. So let's try to refresh our application and see if our implementation is fine. Now that our application has restarted, let's try to create a transaction. So we can see we are getting an invalid wallet, right? So let's see the list of wallets that we have. So our wallet ID is 2, we have 3, we have 4. So I'm going to use the wallet ID of, let me see again, list of wallet ID of 2. and I'm going to save. So we are getting transaction failed, try again later. So let's see what the error is. Column parent ID cannot be null. So we've made a mistake with our migration right there. So let me see our transaction model, parent ID. Oh, this should be nullable. This should be nullable. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop that particular transactions. I'm going to drop it. Then I'm going to rerun the migration. Yeah. And I'm going to rerun our application. Yes. So let's come back to let's hit the API. Yes. So we can see that our transaction is actually being created and we spent this amount of money and all. So let's do some, and this has been recorded as an income, right? So let's check our wallet. Even though this is wrong, this should not be okay. Okay, it's okay. We are saving it as an income, which is fine. So let's refresh our application, our database, and view. So we can see that we've actually inserted that into the system. And what is the amount? 550. That's 500,000, right? So let's go to our list of wallets. So we can see that this is just 100 something. So I'm expecting 500,000 to have been added. So you can see. So let's add some money to our cash wallet. Let's say our cash wallet 3 and 4. 3 and 4. So let's check our list of wallets for 3. Should have 500,000 now. So that's beautiful. So let's record an expense, right? Let's call it an expense. Well, let me just leave this as this. Copy. Let me say store expense. I'm going to call this a post method. This will be raw. This will be JSON. And I'm going to paste that. Store transaction. So we can see the category that is associated to this as paycheck, as you can see, right? So, okay, what we want to change is just the type. I want to change this to be an expense. And I want to retrieve the list of available categories. So food. So I'm going to change that to 1. And I'm going to call it, let me say, rice and beans. I'll call this break fast. And I will record today's dates, which is 26 or 22. So let's copy the URL. We're storing an expense. And let's set the bearer token, hit the endpoint. We're getting some form of error. Okay. So for the expense, we are getting an error. So we can see set using unaddressable value. So which reflect. So after further debugging, there were some couple of errors that I noticed. Initially, this was what we were passing into our find method, and it was expecting a pointer on the it was expecting us to pass it as a pointer like this. So that was what was actually throwing the error that we actually got. So if I remove it and try to actually refresh our application and hit the API, so you can see that we are getting that error. So once we come to the get budgets by category ID right here, please watch out for this method. Once we get to that method and pass the budget like so. So what we are basically doing here is we are joining the budget categories table with the categories table and the budget model itself to retrieve all the budgets that are actually associated to that category, right? So, and we are retrieving all the budgets and we are looping through all the budgets that we have actually retrieved and performing an update. So a few trick that I forgot to add here. Number one, we are filtering by the currently authenticated user ID. We are filtering by the current budget, right? And we are updating the amount like so. So yeah, so that's all we need to do. So if we refresh our application, right, and hit the endpoint again, so you can see that we are getting the correct error. So but for this, we'll probably be having about, due to the testing that I was doing, so we can see that we have to expense. But one thing I want you to notice is, you will notice that when we were getting error, so for example, let me remove two of this data. And let me delete the rows, and let's save. So one thing I want us to notice is when our application was throwing error, let me reintroduce that error and refresh the application. I want you to take note of something. So you can see that initially the insert into transactions, this thing was executed, but if we check our database and refresh, you can see that a new transaction has not been inserted into the transactions table. And that is because our process is actually wrapped inside a transaction. So that's the purpose of wrapping your application inside a transaction. So the next thing I'm going to do now is going to go back to our budget service, and I'm going to I think what we should have done, that error, we should have gotten an error. Let me see, error. Maybe that's why return error. So let me return an error for this particular. Okay, now let's keep it like that. Let's keep it how it is right now, since we are actually logging the error anyway. So okay, so let's fix this and let's refresh our application. If we hit our endpoint now, so we can see our transaction is being recorded like now, so which is perfect for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all our wallets in the database, and I'm going to restart. I'm going to delete all rows, and I'm going to submit. So once I've done that, so what I'm going to do now is, now that I've deleted those wallets, I believe those transactions, you see those transactions has been deleted as well. So yeah, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to generate a new wallet for the user. Yeah, so that wallet is generated, and I'm going to credit the wallet with ID of 6. going to do an income ID of 6, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to also do for ID of 7, save. So if we check our transactions now, so we can see we have two transactions. We have 500,000, 500,000, and they are both of type income. As you can see, the month, the year. So I'm saying something is that, okay, the month is correct. If you look at the month here, we are using 0415, right? And the month, this thing that we selected is also correct. So okay. So I think one thing that I probably want to do is I want to pass this time as the current time that it was actually inserted. So let me go to our transaction handler, and inside our create, where we are formatting the dates, our date format method, I want to format this. I'm not sure if it will work, but let's try it. Time dot date and time. Let's see if that will work. Let's see. By default, since we are only supplying dates, micron dev. Yeah. So let's try to record a transaction or an expense. Sorry. So if we try to record an expense, so let's say I spent 5,500. So I already even created a method for it before now. So let's try to record an expense, right? And let me save. So we are getting not found, store expense, APIs. Okay, let's just use this. So let me say my rice and beans is costing me 3,000 naira, and I'm using the outlet ID of 6, and I'm saving. So we can see that we are getting invalid date formats. So probably what we can probably do is, because I don't like the time that is being picked. Okay, so let's tweak this format date. So currently I am even seeing now that we are not even passing the current time. So this should be, this should actually be time dot now. So let me just say current time. Now pass the current time. We don't need this anymore. Then for this, what we can do is so this should be like the format that we are expecting. 2006. Let me that would be 200. Okay, let me just use the dates only. Time dot dates only. So which is the same thing as what we had initially. Transaction service. Then let's create a new. So let me say supplied date time equals to time dot date. Let's construct a new date ourselves. And the new date is expecting, so we'll say the supplied date dot year, like so. So this one will be, let me get the current time. Yeah. So this will be past date of, let me say, supply date dot day. Let me break this into a new line. So this will be time dot hour, or let me see, it will be current, the current time dot hour, the current time dot the minutes, the current time dot the second, and the current time dot the nanosecond. So that way we've constructed a new one. So we'll pass this instead. So that way we have the right date format. So let me try to refresh our application now and hit the endpoint. Yeah. So we can see our date now is picking 22:04:29, then the time that we are performing the transaction as expected. So which is perfect for us. So if we check our database, so you can see that the time is correct. So this is the time of the recording in my own look, as this was the time that I was recording this video. So yeah. So let me try to record this transaction again as an expense. I'm not certain it is being created. Okay, yeah, it is being created. So 3,000, 3,000. And if we check the budgets that have that associated, so we can see some minus right here, right? Okay. So then if we check our wallet as well, so we can see the wallet cash, we spent 3,000, 3,000 a couple of times on it. So that's why the amount has reduced as well. So now that we've actually, so that will be the end of this particular session. We have actually went through how to record an income and how to record an expense. So in the next session, what we'll be teaching us is how to actually implement reversal. So when a user pays, maybe now that we've actually performed some transaction and we want to say, oh no, I did not perform this transaction, and you actually want to reverse it. So that's the next thing we'll be doing in the next session.